How's everybody doing? Everybody enjoying the conference? Good to be in person, right? No Zoom, no Teams or anything like that? Okay, so maybe I'll start things off, right? Thanks, folks. Great presentations. I think it's finally good to shine a little bit of light on what's happening in the energy and chemicals industry. So I want to talk a little bit about the progress. So maybe this will be an open question to each panelist. So what can be said about the timeline for sustainability progress? And maybe if each of you could answer from your respective areas in energy transition or circular economy. Let's talk timeline. Eric, would you mind going first? Do you have comments on that?
Yeah, so as you saw on the slide, we have 2030 objective and 2050. However, in order to achieve our 2030 objectives, we have already a 2025 ones because we need to start now. A lot of industrial projects, that's not my domain, even if I'm involved in it, but when you install a carbon capture facility, when you're changing some turbine to move from the coal, for example, to gas or hydrogen turbine, that project you have multi years payback, and that's like a 5 to 7 years projects. So if we want to reach the 2030 objectives, which is 20% or 30% of reduction of greenhouse gas, we need to start now, actually. So we have a lot of work about the identification, the selection of technologies, and the prioritization, like always, which is happening right now. And also I would like to share, it's also about internal talent and capabilities. At Indorama, the companies, we grew up extremely fast over the last decades by a lot of external acquisitions. But now we have corporate objectives which are requiring internal capabilities which we need to build. So this effort around sustainability is also an effort about building internal capabilities, skills, and savoir-faire, which we may not have had in the past. So this is also a transformation of the company and the way we operate.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah. Jen, comments?
Yeah, so I think everything you said is absolutely true. I think about getting to 2030, I think it's a couple of years for some of these projects, but then I also think about getting to 2050 to net zero, which is the bolder ambition, right? And so to your point, carbon capture, it takes a couple of years to get your well in place, to get all the infrastructure in place, but think even beyond that, and that is an alternative fuel source to natural gas, like hydrogen, not using those today. It's gonna take, I think, even more time. Now, Europe may move a lot faster, and I think they will because they're not energy secure right now, what's going on with the Russia-Ukraine war. But I think, we have to decide, it's about, if you can take natural gas to hydrogen or you create hydrogen through an electrolyzer, you can do it both ways. I think the question is, we still need to advance the technology a little more so it's cost effective. And it's not just about that, it's also about infrastructure. There's not enough infrastructure yet in place. And I think the Europeans are being very thoughtful today because they're looking at hydrogen networks. You've got to have pipelines, storage, all of these things in order to have regular ratable fuel. So that to me may take, frankly, I think even longer.
Years. John, what about you?
No, I agree with what both my colleagues have said there. Our focus is really much more on the greenfield development. So we kind of think about those 5 and 7 year processes and how can we make 7 years 5 or 4 to get some of these projects in place. But again, I absolutely agree about the lack of infrastructure that supports the projects. You think about our giga systems, we're trying to deploy them in the absence of having to rely on those other technologies. We really can't have project on project risk. So I can't rely on somebody else developing a network or waiting for something to come. So we tend to think about our projects in terms of what can we get done in that 3, 5, 7 year time frame to deliver early, understanding that all those other projects are coming along and they're going to be there. And the only way to get all the way to where we want to go by 2030 or 2050 is to have all of these processes working, the ones from the legacy companies and the ones from the new companies.
Yeah, I'll just comment. So I'm with Aspen Technology, so I'm coming from a digitalization perspective. I think all of us would agree we're a bit behind globally on our climate goals, right? We know there's a lot that needs to get done. And so the urgency that I feel is that we need to use every technology possible to accelerate what we're working on. And I think digital is really critical for that because these early technology developments people need to do, you want to use simulation first, it'll help you move faster. You want to quickly scale, again, you need digital capability to do that. And we're behind. We need to get moving. And we've set and get ambitious goals, which is exactly the right thing to do. But now we need to use every tool possible to try to achieve that. So we're working on it.
Thanks, Paige. Yeah, okay. Any questions from the audience? Alex would be more than happy to bring the microphone over. All we ask is that you please stand and state your name and your company. Perfect. Thank you. Somebody sitting up front.
Hey. All right. So every company has a as a net zero goal by 2050. So that's a common framework that we're all seeing. I'd like to hear what data you're ingesting today, and is it digitized, and how does that affect the strategies for how you go and attack decarbonization projects? And
Good
sorry,
question.
this is Aaron, GE Digital.
Thank you.
I can start maybe. Okay. That's a very good question, actually. It is digitized, but up to a certain point, not entirely. So a big part of the process is still manual, especially on the collect of the information on the carbon consumption. What is digitized is more the second part of it. When it's collected and put on the systems, the calculation and the carbon accounting, what they call. But how we capture this information is still highly manual, and this is an issue because it's highly time consuming for people on the plant. And we're looking at solution of how we can automate that and try to certify the system instead of certifying the numbers which are today managed manually. So we're working with several companies on that and trying to look about what we can do in terms of how we can collect this data. Should we come from the meters, or should it come from an energy management systems, but we cannot install a EMIS on every our plant? That would not make sense. Or should we come, for example, from the invoices? Because if we have the consumption and the invoices, maybe we can do some calculation. So we're working on all of this. We're working with some institutes like science-based program and trying to find a solution of how we can automatize a bit more of that, because today it's heavily time-consuming for people on the plant. We're having a team of data scientists also dedicated to sustainability.
So I think from our perspective, we are not very different, I have to say. So we have a whole lot that is digitized. We do have a lot that's manual, but I also think that the other thing that we're learning through this journey is that we may not have the right granularity of data. So we have some that's overarching, and we understand what we need to go do and accomplish. I think as we're learning, we are looking for more granularity. So that to me becomes more of the manual part for us. And so, and we look at it from a site-by-site basis. And we're trying to create this closed loop where we are recycling everything we can. And so I think about things like we have olefin crackers today. So we crack a lot of ethane, which generates a lot of hydrogen that we want to recycle and then use as a fuel. So we're trying to close all that loop. And so all of that we're looking at, I think, for us to go forward and go faster, we are also doing the same thing. We're working with others to help us try and find that right level of granularity and how to get it digitized faster.
Yeah, so from our perspective with the Greenfield site, we started thinking about these challenges early on, knowing that what was ahead of us is a carbon accounting opportunity that's going to be massive, and the granularity is key. Just as an example, this plant that we're building compared to any other plant in a conventional fossil space, we have about 30 to 40% more IO. Just to capture all of that data at that granular level, so we know where every molecule came from and where every molecule is going, and we can account for the energy injected in the system, the emissions that went out, and what we've produced with those inputs. So it's going to be massive. The granularity of the data, and then the analytics and the processes and the process control and the machine learning and the AI is going to be critical, and we're planning for all of those aspects. It's going to be quite a challenge.
Paige, you want to add on to that?
Well, I'll just add that going from data to insight is what's really critical. So in some cases, it's cleanup of data, discovering it first and then cleanup. So it really becomes insight and helps people make better decisions. And that's not a simple process. I think we all know that. So initially it's, do we have the right data, but let's convert it to insight, which is the analytics and all that activity. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about measuring. I think you brought up, a good point, John. So critical metrics and standards companies are using. So what are some key metrics Do they vary by geographical region? For example, is it CO2 impact? Is it water availability? What are you seeing in terms of critical metrics and standards? Yeah, go ahead and start, John. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, I mean, so we looked at this. I mean, our plants pretty much live and die by carbon intensity. So you basically deconstruct carbon intensity into all of the pieces and parts and all the metrics and measures that result in carbon intensity. And it's a pretty elaborate tree when you start to dissect that and divide it into all of its contributing metrics. But it's all of those things. It's water use and reuse. It's energy injected into the system. It's efficiency of pumps and motors. It's the carbon intensity of the product that came in by rail versus the carbon intensity of the product that came in by barge. It's how much yield loss did we have through pre-treatment, and so how much carbon intensity just evaporated because we had too much yield loss. So for us, it all starts with carbon intensity, and it kind of builds from a family of metrics around carbon intensity for us.
Yeah. Anybody else want to tackle that one?
I think the one thing I'll say is when we think about it from a manufacturing perspective, we were talking about this earlier today, you talk to the manufacturing sites, it's pounds per hour, metric tons per hour, right? How much are we making? What is our energy consumption? Because we want to be thoughtful on variable cost. The things we're looking at today is just, it's exponentially more things to look at, right? So part of it is we're trying to make sure we're looking at the right things first. You can't look at everything all at one time, but tackling the big problems first and then trying to understand impact and then move forward. But I say all that because, again, it comes back to data and it's a big lift. And so that's why I think we are trying to, at least at LyondellBasell, look at where we can get the most value first for the efforts we put forward and then work through the system. Because we have legacy sites. And so it does take a little bit time to get all that data.
Yeah.
I was going to add one comment as well as another critical metric, and both of you were talking about plastics recycling. We're not as far along in that conversation, I think, because this whole issue about mass balance or not and how you do different types of recycling, there's still more work to be done. So we're also a member of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, and we're very much part of that metrics conversation because that's a big one.
Yeah, I would say, just to add a bit to what has been said, which is also very valid for us, but Scope 1 and Scope 2, we pretty much know how to measure. It takes time. It's the question is how we can automate that more, but we measure Scope 1, Scope 2. Scope 3 is a big challenge for us.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Okay. Any other questions, please? Just raise your hand. Eric or Alex will come along with the mic. State your name and company. Okay, back there, Alex.
Hi, I'm Jordan Pierce with OLI Systems. We talked a lot about output metrics as sort of our target. You talked a little bit about input metrics as well. So you're looking at energy intensity, what goes in versus what comes out. Do you make a distinction in your processes between these metrics, input and output, and how do they impact your businesses differently?
Any comments from anyone? Distinction between input and output metrics.
So maybe I'll take that one from a raw materials standpoint, and that's still, I think, to Paige's point, evolving. So we do think about input. So output, we understand our processes today. We know what our energy consumption is. We know what our CO2 footprint is. We can calculate all that. I think from an input perspective, that market is still evolving, and we know where we'd like it to go. So I'll use the example of circularity that Paige mentioned earlier. Chemical and mechanical recycled polymers still evolving. There's still not a lot of it, not enough of it out there. So, I mean, frankly, that's one of the reasons why we're involved, because we want to try and push that forward. We would love to have more pyrolysis oil and be able to crack pyrolysis oil. So it is important for us, the input piece. And so I think we do a couple of things. We do invest in those technologies. The other thing that we're doing, which I didn't mention earlier, is we also invest in venture capital. For those folks that have smaller projects and so that are trying to get something that has legs, I think some of the technologies of tomorrow are not the things we're thinking about today. So I think that's also a great way to have a little more visibility to the technology market.
So let's have a look at digitalization. So we've certainly been talking about, each of the presentations contained significant digitalization examples. Let's maybe just dive in a little bit deeper into that topic. Maybe each of you could talk about how digitalization is accelerating your progress towards sustainability goals. Eric, can you start, please?
Yeah. So there is the what and the how. Actually, the what is a bit what I presented on the slides, but if I would have to summarize, is the measurement, and the needs of the measurement is evolving. We don't measure exactly the same things with exactly the same granularity or real time or not. And there is about efficiency, less waste, higher yield, and overall efficiency. So efficiency is a big domain. We have OEE, we have maintenance, we have performance, we have waste reduction, and we have the measurement. The measurement is key because it's fitting what actually the question a bit earlier about how we can measure and how we can monitor. And sometimes, up to recently, what we measure was mostly focused on the operations. Today, we measure just to know because we have other KPIs to monitor. So this is a what. The how is a bit described in my last slides. We have very different approach on the how, but they are very people-oriented. I will say is how we can also involve everybody into these domains, how we can work very closely with all our business units, and how we can have an enterprise approach and not just as a proof of concept or pilot kind of approach. We try to scale, and which has been very hard for the whole industry for many years. So we really try to have an enterprise approach, and for that we try to build solutions around the people to make them more sustainable and efficient. But we could talk during hours and hours about the how. This is a key question, actually.
Thank you, Eric.
Maybe just to add one additional point from my perspective, and that is, it's very important. We've worked very hard to get a lot of the data digitized, and we're still working on that because it allows us also to do scenario planning, how we overlap projects going forward, and so at the different sites, and every site is a little bit different. So I think that's been very important for us to be able to tailor make it to the site.
So from our perspective, we've talked a lot about kind of the operational focus of digitization. And so, the incredibly complex multivariable model that will be the LP for us operating our plant is completely reliant on the digital structure. But we also see digital enabling us in a lot of other areas. Worker enablement. We are big believers in using digital systems for worker enablement. We're also big believers in relying on our digital systems and using our digital systems to help us with cybersecurity and operational risks and safety as well. So I think it helps us in all those fronts. The idea that digital is the enemy of cybersecurity is completely opposite. I think that all of us in these operations would agree that digital actually can help us with cybersecurity. And there's an old school that those systems are creating more risk than they're solving, but we don't believe that. We think that is the answer.
Thanks, John. Paige?
Maybe I'll just add the point on the scenario planning. These days with the supply chain challenges that people have, that ability to say, okay, what if the vessel doesn't show up with my raw material? What are my alternatives? What kind of things can I do? This is a very common activity right now, is rethinking everything because your supply chains have become less reliable. You need more flexibility. And then the volatility in the market has created huge issues as well. And I think only the other one I'd add that you did speak to, John, was for scale up, digital to help you scale, because that is going to be so critical, particularly the new technologies that are coming for sustainability. You need to scale them quickly. First, we've got to resolve the technology issues, but then very quickly scale that carbon capture activity or new hydrogen approach or whatever alternative it is. And we really need to use that to accelerate. And we're finding that's helping immensely in some of the scale-up activities, particularly for carbon capture right now.
If I may add, an important component also is when I said about the people, and it's to echo a bit what Jen presented, is how to manage. With the target of 2030, 2050, we have a huge portfolio of projects, much bigger than we ever had to manage. And on that, digital and technology in general, we're well positioned because we know how to manage a portfolio of projects. So the people management, but people upskills and training in terms of, I mean, it goes beyond digital, but digital has always been at the forefront of the project governance, the project management, the transformation from waterfall to agile, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think we have a role to play about helping the governance of the company, leveling up the governance of the project portfolio, because simply we have this experience within digital, and we have to train our companies, and we have to help support our companies on that.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah. Any other questions from the audience? Just raise your hand. Just let us know. In the meantime, I'll just shift to another question. So, so John, you've got greenfield facilities. Jen and Eric, you've got brownfield facilities. Paige, as with AspenTech, you work with both. So one of the things I think companies are faced with is the decision on where to build. Because let's face it, we need more technologies, we need more partners, more process licensors, more technologies in order to build either low carbon intensity products or circular products. So how do companies decide, or how do your companies decide on where to build the capital assets, and what are some key criteria for deciding where to build?
So for us, it starts with where are we wanted, right? As a greenfield developer, the last thing we want to do is go into regions or locations that aren't receptive. So we start thinking about where do we want to build? We want to build in places that we can have an impact, a positive impact, and places that really want to see us there. So that's one criteria, and so that's part of the social impact piece of what we do in development, is making sure that we're picking locations that don't have a negative social impact when we implement our projects there. Then we turn our attention to the full scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions criteria. Where can we get feedstocks and fuels in and products out in the most efficient, lowest carbon impact way, right? And then the third for us is flexibility, right? We got to be real careful to make our projects future-proof. Is how are we getting feedstocks and fuels in? How are we getting products out? Do we have multimodal transportation available to us? Do we have rail? Do we have pipeline? Do we have shallow water barge? Do we have deep water port? And so you'll find us placing projects in receptive regions that are looking and supportive of business expansion, where we can have a positive impact on the society where we build our projects, and where we have great logistics, both inbound and outbound logistics. So that's kind of our formula for development. As a greenfield, we kind of have it easy. We're not locked into some of those legacy assets. A little more challenging for some of those.
I mean, I think for new builds, if that's where we're going, and we are, I mean, we're looking at technology of tomorrow. Maybe you make olefins differently than we do today. I think everything John said is spot on, right? We look for a place where, we can bring materials in and out in an effective way. So it starts from the raws to the energy cost to produce, the ability to export your products. The only thing I would also add to overlay is, for those finished products that we're making today, what does the supply-demand balance look? Can we compete within that market, within that given product slate?
Okay, thanks, Jen. Yeah. Okay. Paige, maybe I can just switch to a question to you. So when the rest of us were still locked down, I know you traveled to the United Nations Climate Conference. I believe it was back in November, COP26.
COP26.
Yeah.
But I mean,
What were some of the outcomes, maybe for the folks?
Well, so the Glasgow conference, I think maybe many of you are familiar with it. So this is the UN Climate Change Conference. And it was a significant event. First, it had been put off a year because of COVID. So they put it off, and then it wasn't a window before Omicron, so everyone could actually go. We were testing daily, so it was kind of intense, that whole environment. But I do think we made real progress. There was a sense of urgency, certainly, with the climate concerns. And then also, I think all of us have changed our perception of risk. We never would have thought something like COVID could happen, so suddenly any risk is something that we're much more aware of. And you felt that in the conversations and the urgency. I think there were some critical things that came out, thankfully, when all the nations got together and had these conversations. One is that there was much more discussion about metrics. We talked about that some here. I'd say we made progress. We're not resolved. There's still some other things to do, but the urgency that businesses need metrics. That's how you do business. We need them. And they're not only financial now, we need other tools. So that was really important. I think another critical factor is it used to be that climate goals were looked at every 5 years. Countries would put in what they called the national defined contributions every 5 years. Coming out of Glasgow, that has to be done every year. So that means there's an urgency even within country boundaries to say, well, what are you doing at your plant this year to improve? And that is pushing everyone. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's what we need to do. And then one thing I'll just recognize here, since we have two big plastics producers, in the interim, there's been another UN event. The United Nations Environment Assembly met February and March, and they came out with the Plastic Waste Treaty. This is a huge movement forward, this acknowledgement that we've got to resolve plastic waste in the environment and consider the entire production life cycle for plastics. So the conversations are ongoing, but that was a significant next step that needed to be handled and will be impacting all of us as consumers, certainly, and then companies that participate. And so now we look to COP27 in Egypt in November. So hopefully more progress.
Thanks, Paige. So we've only got a couple of minutes left. Maybe we could just switch to, final recommendations. Is there anything that we haven't covered today? Do you have any recommendations for the asset owners and the solution providers that are here today and towards of building out that sustainability portfolio? Eric, maybe we'll start with you.
That's an interesting question. I think we have many aspects we haven't mentioned. I mean, it's such a large topic. It will be very pretentious to think we have covered everything in an hour and a half. I don't think of something specific. I think we still had a broad view today. We covered about what really matter. Recommendation, I don't know if I have any recommendation, but for me, I would say is data first and data and insight first. So if we don't measure, we don't know. And if we don't know how to take decisions, or we don't know which decision to take. And why I'm saying that is because maybe the decision of yesterday may not be the decision of tomorrow. We may have some counterintuitive decisions to take based on the data. So I think data and insight, not just raw data, insight based on measurement is maybe more important than ever. And that's why we're putting a lot of focus on energy monitoring system and such things, because that may lead to different decisions than what we may have think at first. So we need to be ready to take different decisions and to really challenge a bit ourselves. And maybe if we have been in the industry for decades, we may have to be a bit humble and really to learn.
No, I mean, I think that's a really good point. I think for us, we know what we know how to do. We're good at it, right? And so I think as we move into a more sustainable space, it's important while we collaborate with others that you force us to think more innovatively. You're going to work with others. You're going to collaborate with others. This is an area where I love sustainability because I can sit with a competitor and we can share, right? When we couldn't do that before. So that's actually a really nice place to be today. So, I think my advice to you is force us to think differently. We have a tendency to be very laser focused because we know what we know. And so other opportunities to look at the data differently is going to be key.
Thanks, Jen.
No, I think she actually said exactly what I was going to say. Kind of the C in racer is continuous, right? So be open, be ready, and be ready that if we ask you to think about things differently, it's because we need to do things differently. I know the partners I've worked with over the last 2.5 years, we've asked them to do a lot of things differently than they've done them in the past. So be willing to do that. Listen to where things are going, because if we try to get there with the same tools, the same processes, the same mindset that we've used over the last 20 years that optimized fossil fuel production and offset its risk, we'll never get to the carbon reduction that we need to get to. You got to think differently.
That's right. These are challenging goals. So we need to use all the tools that we can. So innovation, I think in terms of partnership, like you're saying, that I'm so encouraged to see that when you can sit with competitors and have good conversations, but also innovation in terms of technology. I think we're seeing some real development, and it is that there is an urgency now, and the capital is flowing where it needs to go, the financing of this cool new technology that many companies are doing. I think is so important for us to really make progress. And so I'm encouraged. I remain optimistic. I feel the urgency, but I'm going to be optimistic because I think we've got a lot of the tools that we need to make progress.
Okay, thanks, Paige. Okay, thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending, and join me in thanking the panelists.